Thanks for joining this morning. This is the Success Network, or Illinois Education and Career Success Network Policy Committee's annual data deep dive. So it's an opportunity for us to take a step back, look at some statewide data, look at our Success Network data as well, and think about the ways in which our policies and practices are informing or are informed by that data that we are analyzing. We'll do some introductions today of some co-presenters that will be leading this discussion with me. We'll go through kind of setting the stage, why we're talking about data, kind of some of the frameworks that we use here at Ed Systems in terms of thinking about data and how it impacts our work. We'll do a quick little spotlight on a recent iWork Promising Pathways report that has kind of guided our thinking a little bit in terms of how we want to parse out the data and discuss today. Then we will dive into the data from secondary, post-secondary to career. So we'll kind of go through the spectrum of what students experience in Illinois with some of these measures that you see here: ninth grade on track, graduation rate, early college credit, career preparation, whether that's career and technical education or CCPEs. We'll look at some post-secondary measures like enrollment and remediation. And then we'll have some opportunity to discuss and reflect at the end of our data dive. And we'll finish out with some upcoming events and opportunities to continue to engage. So as we go through each of these pieces of data, we will have points for discussion, but I really encourage folks to kind of be jotting down any noticings as we're going through the data. And ready to kind of discuss when we get to the end of each chunk of the data that we are looking at. So again, welcome everyone. Great to see you this morning. My name is Madeline Green. I'm the policy manager here at Education Systems Center at NIU. I'll pass it to Dominique and Rusbe to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Dominique Chombier, and I am a data analyst here at Ed Systems.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rusbe. I'm also a data analyst at Ed Systems.
Awesome. Thank you, Dominique and Rusbe, for your collaboration on this work and for leading the incredible data work that you contribute to our team. So I would love to get just a sense of who's in the room and for you all to kind of be able to connect. So if you could share your name and organization in the chat, would love to hear who's in the room, where you're coming from this morning. Awesome. So I see a great mix here of, some university-based folks, some state agency-based folks, advocates, volunteers, EFEs, nonprofits, organizations. So a really great, well-rounded group of voices that I hope will kind of add some nuance and add their perspectives to the data as we dive in this morning. So you can continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. As we kind of move into thinking about our discussion and how this data relates to us in our own roles, would love for folks to drop in the chat, what is one word to describe how you engage with data in your role? So whether it's, evaluative, whether it is for the purposes of, targeted interventions. And then another question we're posing here is, what data resources do you find yourself turning to the most? So we know there are a variety of data sources, both local and federal, and can be useful to kind of look at many in conjunction, or maybe we just have a few that we find ourselves looking back at more frequently. So one word to describe how you engage with data, or any favorite resources that you find yourself turning to in your work. Great. So lots of different kind of functions that we're using data for. But what I'm hearing is also this continuous theme of, maybe student-centered voice, evaluating programs, ensuring that at the end of the day is what we're doing effective for students, is what we're doing reaching students where they are. So no matter what your role is, there is a way, as I'm hearing, that folks are finding ways to dig into data in their roles. So we'll just kind of set the stage a bit about why we are doing a data dive today. Why are we gathered here and conducting this deep dive into some of the statewide metrics? So here at Ed Systems, we like to think about data as both an opportunity to look out as if it's a window. So develop insights into what's happening in the field, whether that's directly on the student level, within schools, within districts. This can be helpful to have a frame of comparison and contextual analysis of how different communities are maybe implementing different policies based on kind of that external looking out to data sources. But then we also recognize the importance of using data as a mirror, right? So a mirror to look inwards and reflect on our own practices. Is what we're doing effective? Is what we're doing having the intended outcome that we seek to have with this work? So I love to use this quote to think about the systems that we work in and that we work to improve across the state. Any system produces what it was designed to produce, from the National Equity Project. So I like to think of systems as many different kind of players coming together, each with their own priorities and kind of objectives within their context. And when we make up that system, there are kind of potentially some unintended consequences or some students who are left further from opportunity because the system may be blind to kind of the nuance of the unique context in which Illinois students are engaging in their secondary and post-secondary career. So this metaphor of the bicycle and kind of mode of transportation for folks with, varying ages or ability can be useful to think about how we want to support students, right? So when we want to support students, we don't necessarily want to give every single student the same exact support or the same exact program. We know students are unique. We know students have different interests, values, talents, areas where they may need support. And so we want to meet them where they are. We want to provide them the accommodations, the supports to succeed and to thrive, no matter where they're coming to us from. And so we kind of operationalize this within our data use theory of action. And essentially, the idea behind this is the intentionality behind using data, right? That we're not just kind of randomly dropping in, plucking data to support, an argument or a narrative, but that instead we are building the groundwork. So that orange bar at the bottom, those conditions for data use, we're building a groundwork of having really quality data, trusting our sources, ensuring we understand the methodology behind that data and its collection and analysis. We want to ensure that we're building capacity for using data, that we build it into our schedules to kind of have this time to assess data and to take action for next steps. And then we also want to make sure that we're instilling a culture of data use, right? That, as we'll see in a slide, that, data use as a tool to illuminate and not to punish, right? So all of these kind of foundational philosophical pieces of data use are essential to then build up the foundation for converting that data into actionable policy, programs, practice, student placement, and ultimately with the goal of increasing student achievement. So again, this metaphor of the hammer and the flashlight, like to think of it as, you're woken up to a huge crash and boom in the middle of the night, the power has gone out. Which tool are you grabbing, right? Are you swinging a hammer around and potentially, harming your dog? I know my puppy is always up in the middle of the night, or your family or loved ones, or are you taking a more precise approach with the flashlight, using the data to illuminate rather than to punish or to point fingers at where there are gaps in the system, but instead using it in a collaborative way to shed light. And that light can lead us to improved practice and policy. So let's go ahead and dive in. Before we do, I just will hand over to my colleague Dominique, who will give us a little bit of context into some of the Success Network data that we'll see a little bit later this morning. So Dominique, you can take it away.
Yes, thank you, Madeline. So we wanted to show this slide to frame our thinking around some of the outcomes that we're seeing at the statewide level versus not in the Success Network versus in the Success Network. These data are pulled from the most recent Illinois report card. So first we have, our statewide demographic breakdown, but then we also have the breakdown of those students not in the Success Network and in the Success Network. You'll see that looking at the breakdown of students in the Success Network, there was a lot more Hispanic and Black students compared to statewide. You'll also see that we included a chart excluding Chicago. And that's because Chicago contains a disproportionately large amount of Black and Hispanic students, as well as low-income students, and a disproportionately small percentage of white students. So as we're thinking about the purpose of the Success Network to sort of close those equity gaps and create meaningful post-secondary attainment, we just want to be thinking about the sort of demographic context and how these barriers sort of have historically kept students from reaching similar outcomes in attainment over time. So maybe take a moment to look at these charts while we're framing this thinking.
Thank you, Dominique, for that framing. Really helpful to understand how maybe demographic differences in different data lenses that we're looking at may impact the data. And so, again, using a flashlight, investigating those threads of if a student group is facing barriers in a certain context, how does that compare statewide? How does that compare to other communities can be a useful lens. All right, so we're going to start just with this report that was recently, or a new installment of a report that was recently released in December of 2025 from the Illinois Workforce and Education Research Collaborative. So this was in collaboration with Illinois Department of Employment Security, as well as the Illinois State Board of Education. And again, it's the second part of their series of the Promising Pathways report. So drilling down on the longitudinal connections between a student's secondary experience and their student records from secondary all the way to employment. So this is linking that employment data within the high school to career platform of over 6.2 million Illinois students. So tracking those students from their secondary experience to workforce, with the caveat, of course, because it is the Illinois Department of Education Security or Employment Security, that these are students who were employed and were employed in Illinois. So it's not capturing students who've left the state, but still can give us a great window into those connections between education and workforce. And so we'll show just two visualizations from this report, and we really encourage you to dive deeper into this series. We'll drop the link here for that iWork report. But these two visualizations are helpful for us in our thinking about framing the end goal, right? Beginning with the end in mind and backwards mapping, how do we get students to good quality jobs? So good job in this report refers to a job in which the student's earnings are within the top 3 quintiles relative to their cohort peers. So that's taken after 3 years after their last educational enrollment. So here you can see differing education completion from high school only, some college, no degree, associates, and then bachelor's. And as you can see, this also is disaggregated by race and ethnicity. And we can see here that as we move across educational attainment, we can see that those, not only their rate of achieving a good job is much higher, higher degree that they've attained, but also that those gaps in terms of racial equity are narrowing as students progress in their educational attainment. And we also wanted to kind of offer this report as a way to continue to think about this kind of local and national discussion that has been occurring in terms of this divide or potential, dichotomy between folks, setting students down either the path of college or the path of career, right? And so we're thinking about all of the programs and all of the opportunities that students have from secondary to post-secondary as paving that way for students to thrive in college and career, right? Preserving that ability for students, regardless of their race, regardless of their income or any other factors, to be able to thrive and have the chance at a great job with their highest, educational attainment. And also in thinking about pathways, we want to make sure that those pathways are not kind of zero sum or strictly linear or leading students to kind of dead ends, right? We want to make sure that students have the opportunity to move beyond, maybe earning a credential, stacking it with an associate's degree, continuing their education to continue to achieve economic mobility. So the report does find that higher education is still the most promising pathway for students to achieve a good job for students of all racial, ethnic, and income backgrounds. With that being said, the report does mention that some non-bachelor pathways can still lead to good jobs for Illinois students, though these are primarily overrepresented for male students in fields like manufacturing, construction, agriculture, some associate's level engineering roles, health, mechanic and repair industries, things like that. And so thinking about this report as kind of a guiding light of the end goal being good jobs and economic mobility for students, we'll kind of start to think about the steps along the pathway that students have to achieve that goal. So the last slide was focused on kind of the racial disparities in income and good job attainment based on level of degree completion. Here we have a similar view, but instead for students from low-income backgrounds. So the percentages you see at the top are the proportion of the Illinois students from low-income families who work in a good job as early career adults. And then the size of each bubble along the bottom kind of continuum, the size represents that kind of N, right? The number of students who within their data set were achieving a good job. So we see on the left from high school only, just about 19% of students who had only achieved a high school degree or diploma were achieved, a placement into a good job. That increases to 45% of students with a certificate. We see a vast majority of students, 31,000, at least in this data set, this view, were achieving some college, maybe facing barriers to completion, so not completing that college degree, but 46% were still able to find success within a good job. It continues to rise with associate's degree. 52% of those students were in a good job, 79% with a bachelor's degree, and then 92%, of course, of students with a master's or doctoral or professional degree were in a good job. And of course, we can see kind of as education increases and as there may be barriers to continuing education beyond bachelor's, that number, that N is pretty small as at 1,000 students who achieved that master's or doctoral. So again, we present this data to kind of give us that guiding light in our discussion this morning of thinking about all of these data points that we'll look at from secondary to post-secondary to some of the kind of career preparation activities that are happening in those spaces, thinking about all of those culminating in our ultimate goal of students having good jobs, ability to support, their thriving lives and families, and the ability for us to kind of support them to that goal, no matter where they're coming to our educational institutions and systems from. All right, so now we'll get into the data that our Ed Systems data team has prepared. So again, highly recommend checking out that iWork report. Both installments so far have been really enlightening, so highly recommend. And iWork is also always putting on webinars to kind of dissect and discuss that data as well. But now we'll turn to some of the data that we had collected and analyzed for our discussion today. So as I mentioned, with that end goal of a good job and economic mobility in mind, we'll kind of parse out our discussion this morning along different stages of a student's journey toward that goal. So we'll first look at secondary measures. We'll then look at early college credit and the power that that has to unlock post-secondary success for students. We'll look at career preparation, and then we'll look at post-secondary enrollment and remediation rates as well. So within this chunk, we will be looking at ninth grade on track and four-year graduation rates. And again, with that equity lens in mind of supporting students where they are, we'll look at comparisons by race and ethnicity. We'll also look at comparisons by income. So before we look at the data, take a moment to reflect for yourself. What is the why? Why are we looking at ninth grade on track? Or why have you looked at ninth grade on track in your own work? Why have you looked at four-year graduation rates in your own work? And why would we disaggregate by race, by income? You can jot down your notes on that reflection. And again, as we go through about 4 different data visualizations in this stage, you can jot down notes as well, and we'll have time for discussion at the end of this secondary portion of the data. So as I mentioned, the first piece that we will look at this morning is ninth grade on track, and this is by statewide data, trends by race and ethnicity. So as we can see, we're seeing progress across all groups in terms of students being determined on track when they're in ninth grade due to kind of credit completion and academic performance metrics that ensure that student is on track to graduate. So take a moment to take a moment to look at this data, jot down anything that is catching your eye, or maybe you would like to dive deeper into discussion around. Noticing also, as we see in many data sets, a big dip in school year 2020-2021 due to the pandemic, and kind of seeing the upward progress we've had to recover from that time. So now we'll look at ninth grade on track by income status. So again, with that equity lens in mind, how are we supporting students who may be from low-income backgrounds to thrive in ninth grade so that they are able to graduate and move on to whatever their next step is, post-secondary education, career. And we do see promising increase in ninth grade on track rates for both low-income and overall general population of students statewide. But we do see that worrying kind of gap, right, between students who come from low-income backgrounds in most recent data, achieving ninth grade on track at just a percentage of 82.8% versus the general population at 89.3%. You may also be thinking about if you use ninth grade on track in your own context. Kind of what are the different conversations you're having with students about this metric? What are conversations you may be having with educators around this metric? And how can we kind of empower educators, counselors, administrators with this knowledge of this disparity, and then maybe prompt some reflection on policy and practice to ameliorate some of this gap that we're seeing. All right, so the next 2 slides that we'll see before we can open it up for discussion are going to be graduation rate. So ninth grade on track being more of that kind of formative assessment and checkpoint of how are students progressing through high school. It gives us more of kind of a live look at where we can support students. Graduation, more of a summative measure, right? It's students have graduated or they have not. They're no longer within that secondary space. But it can be a useful tool to understand, where are there opportunities for supporting students who maybe struggling to reach graduation to achieve that high school diploma. So again, you'll notice pretty significant gaps, particularly between white and Hispanic and Black students across Illinois, at 92.4% for Illinois white students. The overall graduation rate being at 89%, Hispanic students at 86.4%, Black students at 82.9%. And again, some pretty steady progress across groups, yet some pretty significant gaps in this achievement coming out across groups. And then finally, before we can get into some discussion, we're looking here at high school graduation rates overall for students across the state versus subset of students who come from low-income backgrounds. So perhaps, what kind of stands out to me here is the more precipitous drop between school year 1920 and 2021 for low-income students. And so we were thinking, what are some of the factors, that could have contributed to that, whether it's students, needing to take on part-time work or full-time work instead of their education, whether it's being harder hit by the pandemic in terms of students having families with more frontline roles during the pandemic. And we do see, that tick up to 83% gradually, coming back progress from that dip during the pandemic. But we do see almost, a 6% gap, percentage point gap between the overall 4-year high school graduation rate at 89% statewide versus 83.7% for low-income students. So now that you've had a chance to kind of look at that secondary data of ninth grade on track and graduation rates, looking at, race versus income level, would love to open up for, a few minutes of discussion here. But these are just some starting questions to prompt our thinking, but open up any reflections that folks may have had from viewing that data. The first here, first offering being, how do you consider these leading or formative indicators like ninth grade on track versus those more outcome or summative indicators like graduation rate in your practice? How do you kind of hold those two together? How do you look at the relationship between them? What stands out to you from the data that we've seen? Any surprises? Any prompting further thinking? That potential, right, for leaders, for educators to use ninth grade on track as kind of that early indicator, that warning light of the student just completed ninth grade. How are they set up to succeed in the rest of their secondary years? Are there interventions that we can think about in terms of, as Ben wrote in the chat, grades and attendance, like conversations around the value of attendance, particularly as we see the state kind of navigating chronic absenteeism and all of the challenges that underlie that crisis of chronic absenteeism, right? It's not necessarily a one solution fits all problem. There are many different factors going in, whether it's transportation, mental health. But how are we using that ninth grade on track? How are we using those attendance metrics, again, to shine a flashlight to understand kind of the underlying factors? Thanks, Bill, for putting that in the chat. Freshman on track, very actionable, great, indicator. There is, as folks may have seen, ongoing ISB accountability updates. And so that's something to keep an eye on if ninth grade on track is valuable for you. and how you think about school success and student success within their community schools. Jeffrey in the chat, appropriate takeaway here. Is it appropriate to conclude, given how graduation rates statewide for students of color and low-income students are higher than their respective ninth grade on track rates, students in the schools in the state are making some good progress in targeting interventions and supports early on. Of course, there's still work to be done. That's a great point. When we do look at those comparisons of ninth grade on track rates for students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, perhaps being much lower than eventually what their graduation rates are. And so could be an opportunity, right, for celebration of what are those interventions that we're making. And I welcome, anyone who may work in a high school setting, education, counseling, administration. If there are any examples you have of like how you're using ninth grade on track, any interventions that you think about as a result of looking at that data would add a lot of useful perspective to this conversation.
Can I reply verbally?
Please, yeah.
I should have done my homework a little bit to see what data elements are a part of the ninth grade on track, but our principal likes using the data. And a couple of the things that we're doing in our school district, all of our department chairs or all of our departments have meetings on a monthly basis. As part of those meetings, they're asked to identify students who are failing or at risk of failing, and then to identify some steps that those teachers in the classrooms can start taking now to maybe differentiate their instruction so that those students don't fail those classes. The reality is if students are failing the classes that they hate the most, then they have to take them again. And then also that, in my world, I'm a career and technical education director, then that gives them fewer options for classes that might actually keep their interest or help them to become productive citizens once they graduate high school. So we're trying to do what we can to alleviate those students who may be at risk of failing those classes at the ninth grade level, and then just setting them that one step back. We don't want them to have that step back as they progress through high school. So.
And thank you, Laura, for that insight as to what this looks like in your context as a CTE director, and how your principal and school leadership is also thinking about, how are we not just looking at the data here and understanding where students are not reaching ninth grade on track, but what are we doing next? What's the next step? What's, instead of just maybe putting students in the same class again and hoping for a different result, which, effectively, I was a former middle school educator as well. The behavioral psychology around that, like maybe not the most effective choice, but where can we really have those relationships and those deeper conversations around maybe like root causes, or students who don't see the relevance in their day-to-day school, and perhaps maybe would find more relevance in something that's more career connected or connected to their interests, which I'm sure maybe you see as in your CTE work as well, that can be a driver for students. Now we're going to turn to look at early college credit. So one of those strong policy and practice bridges from secondary to post-secondary is giving students that access to take college coursework, earn college credit, often at no cost while they're in high school, to then be able to hit the ground running and, not lose any time, and certainly maybe shorten and make more efficient their post-secondary journey. So those are some of kind of the things that I'm thinking about when I think about early college credit, but think about in your practice, in your context, what is your why behind early college credit? Why is it important to you? Why is it important to your school? Maybe what are some of the outcomes you've noticed from students having access to early college credit? Take a moment just to reflect. You're welcome to put anything in the chat that's sparking for you or come off mute. But again, in this section, we'll look at dual credit and AP participation. We'll look at that comparison by race, ethnicity, and income. And then we'll look at kind of year-over-year growth statewide in dual credit participation. So as we go through each of these data visualizations, again, feel free to jot down any notes that are coming up for you. And then, like we just did, we'll have some dedicated time to discuss at the end of this section. So here's our first metric, early college coursework. So including both dual credit and AP coursework. This is statewide, and these are student numbers, so raw counts of student participation in these courses. So the green bar being AP courses, the dark blue bar being dual credit. Again, this is just kind of to set the stage. How many students year to year are taking dual credit or AP in the state before we take a look at breakdowns demographically. So now we'll take a look at, again, counts of students participating in dual credit specifically, so no longer AP, but dual credit. And we see this disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So that dark blue at the top, again, being overall number of students participating in dual credit or enrolling in dual credit. And then we see across student groups, white students, Hispanic, Latino students, Black students, how those rates of participation may vary, rates of enrollment, or numbers of enrollment, I should say. So, promising to see overall for students since school year 2022, going from 85,000 to in school year finishing in 25, 107,000. So that's a pretty significant increase in student enrollment in dual credit. But as we can see, that increase hasn't necessarily been borne out for all student groups, right? So, or that proportionate increase, I should say, has not been reflected across groups. So an 8,000 increase across white students with access and enrolling in dual credit, about 7,000. Again, thinking back to kind of the framing that Dominique gave us of statewide demographics and obviously differing sizes of populations among these groups, but the kind of slope can kind of give us a sense of how many more students are having access to dual credit instruction. And then we see here that, again, that overall count of students who are enrolling in dual credit overall. And then we do see the lighter blue bar specifically for low-income students. It's a great point, Laura. Reduces the time you need in college, especially for low-income or students from low-income backgrounds. That can be a cost-saving measure. The 2+2 agreements. Maybe the shift to virtual. That's a great point, Heather, of colleges offering more online courses. We've seen recently the U of I has initiated a partnership with the Illinois Virtual Schools Academy to offer online dual credit. And so that can be a promising practice to expand access for students, especially maybe in rural areas or in areas with educator shortages. Some maybe policy or legislative pushes from the State House that have impacted this rise as well. Great wondering, Bill, how much of that difference in dual credit enrollment by race that we just looked at is due to disparities in access? So student access being determined largely by those external factors, how resourced a school is, their adequate level of adequacy in funding, teacher vacancy rates. Not necessarily, that students aren't opting in or aren't academically ready for dual credit, but potentially just don't have the access, don't have the opportunity presented to them. Yeah, and Dominique pointed out in our work with our student advisory council, have heard from students across the state that they don't even have access, don't even know what AP is or don't have it within their school, which is certainly alarming, that we want to increase access across schools regardless of district demography or resources. So looking now at our next data point or visualization here, this is percent change in dual credit enrollment. So presented by, again, race and ethnicity, we can see those percentage changes year over year in how many students are enrolling in dual credit statewide. So we do see pretty big bumps across all groups in school year 23-24. We can think about maybe what was the policy impetus behind that? What could be some elements of practice that folks were incorporating into their classrooms or schools to increase access to dual credit enrollment? So again, take a moment to look here. And then finally, that same view of year-over-year change, but now looking overall versus low-income students statewide. So again, school year 23-24 standing out, particularly for students from low-income backgrounds, a 28.8% year-over-year increase. That's pretty incredible. And we can start to think about, what are some of the foundational qualifying factors that kind of made that, or conditions that made that possible, and how can we continue to maybe build on that momentum, seeing that in 24-25 we didn't quite see such a big year-over-year increase for students from low-income backgrounds. So now that we've looked at those views in early college credit, offering these questions for discussion, but again, welcome any reflections that folks may have. First of all, what do you notice in the data? What implications does that have for your policy or your practice? And then what outcomes have you noticed for students that are involved in early college credit? Is it prompting them to think more about post-secondary, a post-secondary degree when maybe they hadn't before? Is it sparking increased attendance or engagement in class because they feel like it's, meeting them at their rigor level and exposing them to college coursework? Any reflections on these questions or any of the data that we just saw? Love to hear. Anything stand out to you? I was particularly struck by that 23-24, almost 30% year-over-year increase in low-income student enrollment in dual credit. But again, as someone has pointed out in the chat, this data does reflect enrollment, right? It doesn't reflect passage or, AP test passage or ultimately receiving that credit from a student passing the course. And so, we do want to get the students of all backgrounds to the dual credit course or to the early college coursework, but then what are we doing to help them succeed and pass and be able to use that as a bridge to higher education? It's a great question, Danielle. Is there data available to show AP test pass rates and increased participation? Not sure if anyone on the data team knows of a source there.
Maybe participation via maybe what you showed already through enrollment, but combining pass rates. It's a really interesting question. I would love to maybe not at the statewide scale, just publicly available. Maybe something we can look into. Polling on a smaller scale, but it's a great thought.
Yeah, it's a great question, and especially not just getting students to the opportunity, whether it's early college or college, but making sure that they succeed and thrive in that opportunity. All right. So our third stop on our journey of, following what a student experiences from getting from secondary to eventually a good job as the outcome. We'll now look at career preparation programming, such as career and technical education, as well as college and career pathway endorsements. So think about for yourself, what is the why behind access to CTE and CCPE? We've already heard some reflections around potentially boosting student engagement and their feelings of interest and relevance in what they're doing at school, if they feel like it can connect to their interest in what they want to do with their work life. But what are some other factors you think are in influencing that? So again, I'll hand it over now to Dominique to guide us through these CTE and CCPE measures, as we do have some kind of success network lenses here. But at the end of this chunk, we'll have some time to discuss, as we did before.
So first we have our school year 25 CTE participation statewide and success network. So we see that at the statewide level, we had 49% CTE participants compared to 26% CTE concentrators. And at the success network level, we had 41% participants compared to 21% concentrators. So not as much as statewide. But again, this, ultimately comes down to access in those districts in the success network. So hope to see an increase in the next few years. Next slide, please. Next, we have CCPE endorsements. So we wanted to include a number of endorsements from previous years. Unfortunately, ISB has not released the published class of 2025 data yet, but we are expected to see these data released sometime in February. So next month, we'll be on the lookout for that. Hope to see a similar trend increase in CCPE endorsements, and hopefully an increased number of districts who are earning these endorsements as well. Thank you, Emily, for spelling it out. But what ISB has been able to release is the number of students by demographic who tentatively have earned this endorsement. This is separate from the count that they usually release. They're based on an undercount of CCPE earners using ISB College and Career Readiness data, the CCRI data. So compared to the class of 2024, we don't see much of a difference in the class of 2025 in terms of this demographic breakdown. One notable increase is we saw an increase in percentage of Black students who are receiving these endorsements, 8% compared to 6% in the class of 2024. But otherwise, pretty much the same, just a 1 percentage point increase in the number of white students from 55% to 56%. And amongst Hispanic students stays the same, 24% there.
So any noticing surprises, challenges, or celebrations that are kind of emerging from these data for you? Or in your community, why are these opportunities important for your students? What are you noticing outcome-wise as a result of students having access to this career prep programming?
Something I'm noticing is that, when we look at when we think about how significantly the number of students graduating with endorsements, it increases year over year, but the demographic breakdown, which is imperfect given the sort of timing of different submissions, it's showing obviously that disproportionately white students are owning college and career pathway endorsements, and other subgroups of learners are underrepresented in earning college and career pathway endorsements. And so it begs an interesting question of, when we see those inequities at a system level, when we think that these strategies are going to open doors to, acceleration to and through post-secondary, that real cohesive experience for a learner to help them explore and prepare for their future journeys, thinking about who has access to that, it's both about resourcing for districts to be able to implement those things, but also, ensuring that when we are building those programs, that we are recruiting learners in ways that are meeting, the reflecting the overall student body as not just a subset of the student body. And there's kind of questions at both the state level and at district and building levels that I think emerge for me, right? Because those inequities aren't necessarily evident in a single building per se. Maybe they are, but they are evident at a systems level, and it makes me wonder at what are the different ways we can think about that, both at systems and district and building levels.
It's a great point. And yeah, good thing to think about and reflect as we, understand the value of these opportunities, but who are these opportunities designed for? And who not only has access, but for whom are these opportunities relevant, exciting, interesting, aligned with their interests and skills? Some may remember from this past spring, the Success Network Policy Committee led a work group and identifying some of the barriers to CCPE implementation in the state. And we heard just that practitioners were concerned that, there was a lot of energy around building out pathways that typically gravitated or attracted more white students or, male students, maybe manufacturing, construction. But the reflection there was that folks wanted to think more holistically and center student voice. And how are we not just standing up CCPE and then kind of moving on to our next objective, but how are we intentionally designing these programs to be relevant and exciting and interesting for students of all backgrounds? So it's a great reframe. All right. Moving now to post-secondary measures. So this will be our last chunk of data that we'll look at this morning. We will look at matriculation rates statewide, both between 4-year and 2-year colleges. We'll view comparisons within the Success Network and statewide. And then we'll also look at a relationship between community college enrollment and rates of increase or decrease versus remediation rates. So again, feel free to jot down notes as we go through each visualization, and then we'll have some time to discuss at the end. But I'll hand it over to Rusbeh to guide us through the analysis he did on this data.
So starting off with post-secondary enrollment within 16 months, what we're looking at here is 2-year enrollment matriculation rates and 4-year. You'll see that 4-year matriculation rates are relatively stable, around 40% in the last 6 years, but 2-year matriculation rates have fluctuated and have somewhat decreased. I should note that there's a 2-year lag in the data that's available for post-secondary enrollment. So when I said the last 6 years, I actually mean starting from class of 2023 and then 6 years prior to that. So class of 2023 matriculated in fall of 2023. And here we show matriculation rates 4-year, 2-year broken down by statewide, Success Network, and not in Success Network. Success Network seems to fare particularly well in the 4-year matriculation rates. We see about a 5% greater level of matriculation in the Success Network metrics, but in the Success Network groups of districts. But maybe there's a difference here between the 2-year matriculation rates where the not in Success Network has a greater matriculation rate of 2-year community college enrollment. And this is again within 12 months versus 16 months. Now looking at another side of the coin, which is remediation rates when students matriculate into community college. And these remediation rates are broken down by subject. So what you'll see is that remarkably, between the class of 2019 and 2020, there was a pretty steep decrease in remediation rates among all subjects, and particularly math, which was great to see. But then, and they since the fall 2020, it's been relatively stable. But recently there's been a slight and on the decrease. But recently there's been a slight increase in the math remediation rates. I should also mention that again, this is the data available to us is 2 years behind. So the latest available is the class of 2023.
I think it's concerning to see an uptick in math remediation from the class of 22 to 23. I know that the next slide will kind of interrogate that question a little bit about where that's coming from, but certainly given what we know about remediation and its impacts on student progressions, it's definitely concerning to see an uptick in remediation. And also just at a minimum, sort of a slower set of progress around reducing those rates of remediation overall. And I think there's questions around what it means for how we're scaling things like transitional instruction. And then also on the post-secondary side of the house, like what's happening with those learners. I know that organizations like the Partnership for College Completion and others and Women Employed are doing lots of great work on dev ed reform. That certainly fits in here too.
I think another thought that this always leads to for me is like, is like the slight uptick driven by a few regions, or is it like an overall statewide pooled increase? So, I mean, the back end of how we're calculating this is a pooled estimation of statewide remediation rates, but like that really may differ by region, which it would be an important thing to break down.
Can you respect to that point? Can you speak to these rates that are here are their statewide rates? Are those fully accurate given the changes in redactions to the overall reporting of remediation data on the report card?
The report card has a statewide row of data. So
it wouldn't necessarily just be the sum of everything that's not redacted.
Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
With it in the inspection sense.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. Again, thinking about that layered perspective on like, so we showed you remediation, we showed you matriculation rates, and this is a graph layering 2-year community college and matriculation and remediation. So the bar graphs are matriculation, and the line graphs are remediation in math and English within those same cohort years. So that's looking at the most recent data. We have the slight decrease in matriculation also led to a slight increase in remediation in math. But again, reading seems to be on the decline, hopefully continuously. Yeah, it could be true that remediation is driven by enrollment, but then definitely in the later years, I wonder if it's the case for the same most recent year where enrollment seems to decrease, but remediation for math at least increases. But these are small, I guess, decreases and increases compared to at least like class of 2018 and 2019.
Just thinking about that relationship between enrollment and remediation. Like the class of 2021, we do see a slight decline to the class of 2022, 2023, but then we see upticks in math remediation. And so again, that idea of ensuring we're getting students to that next educational opportunity, whether it's dual credit, whether it's community college, four-year university, but not just getting them to the door, ensuring that they thrive and succeed and complete. And we know remediation can often be a huge barrier to succeeding and completing a degree, as it may take, more cost, incur more costs for students, take more time. We would think about also maybe some of the interventions that we have to address that challenge of getting students to their next step and ensuring that they are prepared to succeed in that next step. So I think about something like transitional instruction. As you may be familiar, being a statewide effort in both reading and math, or English and math, I should say, born out of the PWR Act, Post-Secondary Workforce Readiness Act in 2016, but really ramped up to implementation over the last few years, and continuing to see upticks in student access to those courses, but perhaps not at the level that those remediation rates would require to, again, transitional instruction being that kind of stopgap measure of ensuring that when students are completing their senior year of high school, that they are gaining those skills and competencies to then go into credit-bearing coursework rather than remedial coursework. But any other maybe policy or practice implications you're thinking about as you looked at that data of remediation, matriculation? Any surprises, any challenges this is sparking for you, any celebrations that this is bringing up for you?
I would love to see, I know it's kind of hard given where the data exists publicly versus not, and also the lack of disaggregated data on remediation in particular. Like, they just don't publish it in a disaggregated way. And obviously the redactions that Dominique's mentioning in the chat, but we hypothesize that there is a relationship between scaling up of things like transitional math instruction and transitional English instruction and other interventions earlier on to address learning needs for students. But I would love to see sort of some of those enrollment and data in transitional, like in success data in transitional instruction next to the same cohort, right? Like, how do we connect the dots between those different data sets to understand, ideally, like, is transitional instruction working the way it should be, or ideally is supposed to? And if so, like, what do we then need to target in terms of scaling that up? And other interventions as well. But that one comes top of mind to me on remediation. And I see Bob's got a question in the chat too.
Yeah, great question. Are there efforts to tie some of this data to the ILDS, the Illinois Longitudinal Data System, to see if and how we can make predictive assessments around how students perform in early childhood, third grade measures, into eventual post-secondary matriculation and remediation?
Yeah, Madeline, I would just say, currently the ILDS effort is essentially on hold as the governor's office determines how to move it forward. What is happening right now is that there is work on an early childhood integrated data system, and I think once that's in place, the ability to connect early childhood data to some of these other measures will be a lot stronger. So I think that in particular, being able to do some work around predictive modeling, for how prepared students are as they come into early childhood, even looking at data on, students' backgrounds and such, and, screenings that they've done, maybe some health indicators, and then understanding how those relate to third grade achievement and beyond. In addition, I think eventually we really got to get to a place where we're able to link high school data to that workforce data, so that we can understand how these, the different measures we're looking at here impact that employment in much the same way that iWork did. They used a one-off data set for that work, and being able to do that type of work on a more consistent basis will be important moving forward.
Thanks, Ben, for that context. And yes, that's why we highlighted the iWork report at the beginning. But as you mentioned, that's a one-off data set that they've been able to do that analysis on. And how powerful would it be if we were able to have a statewide system to use that continuous improvement lens to investigate year over year, you know, how are conditions changing? What are those supportive factors to getting students to post-secondary and career success? Keeping an eye on time, I'm going to move us forward to just wrap up, you know, with some closing reflection and discussion here. So again, thinking back to the iWork report we saw at the beginning of today's session around, you know, what level of educational attainment most commonly leads to a good job. And considering that good job and that economic security, mobility that comes out of having a good job, what reflections kind of emerge from the data that you've seen today? Or what, from where your vantage point at your point in the system or your point in the journey that a student is taking, what are some policy and practice implications that are coming to mind for you? We heard some great examples earlier from Laura around how their school operationalizes looking at ninth grade on track and making those targeted interventions. And any other reflections or ideas for how to operationalize this? Or more broadly, which metrics were most helpful? What do you maybe want to return to in your own work or in future data dives with our policy committee? What data did you feel was missing? Or what data would kind of complete the picture for you? We talked around not just dual credit enrollment and AP enrollment, but what about success rates? You know, we can think about incorporating that into data dives in the future. Is that something available on the Illinois report card? ILDS, that longitudinal data set, you know, as we were just discussing. Disaggregated remediation data. All right, we will have a short survey in just a few minutes here where you can share more of your thoughts around what this is sparking for you for next steps, what data you'd still want to see in the future. But we'll pivot to just closing out with some announcements about upcoming opportunities. So first that I'll mention here, I'll be leading our quarter one meeting. We have 4 annual policy committee meetings. This being kind of the annual data dive, but our more general policy committee meetings. We're excited to be planning for Leadership Community Spotlight to be announced to give us some really good ideas around centering student voice in developing, like we mentioned, those CCPE and CTE programs that are really responsive to student interests and needs. We'll also have some other featured updates legislatively around what's happening in Springfield as they are kicking off this legislative session. And we'll have some updates as well around federal policy that's coming out, particularly around workforce Pell. That being a huge part of the conversation, of course, as we think about pathways that enable students to continue to stack and continue to thrive in their journey and not reducing the amount of dead ends that we set our students out toward. So Emily dropped that link in the chat. If you'd like to register, would love to see you there at the policy committee meeting. And I'll hand to Dominique to just share a bit about the updates to the dashboard that she has created.
Yes, thank you, Madeline. We're excited to announce that the Success Network dashboard is now published with newly released school year 2024-2025 Illinois report card data by leadership community and districts. For those of you who may not have interacted with the dashboard before, the Success Network dashboard is designed to help leadership communities and all regions across Illinois better understand learners' experiences in pursuing post-secondary credentials. So the visualizations allow you to compare data by school districts, community college districts, leadership communities, and also EFEs in the CTE dashboard. You can explore data for 6 different metrics. We have ninth grade on track, early college coursework, CTE participation, high school graduation rates, post-secondary enrollment, and remediation rates. So I believe Emily just dropped that link in the chat. Please do explore the dashboard. We're really excited to put it out annually. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Dominique.
Sorry, like Ben said, please let us know if there are any other features you would like to see as well while you're exploring.
Thank you so much, Dominique. Really exciting to have access to this recent data and, of course, comparisons historically as well. And hope this can be a useful tool for you to continue those data conversations in your local context. And of course, yes, let us know as you're using the tools, what would be helpful to see? What other metrics would you like to see? Always responsive to those ideas. I will now mention what's coming up here in about a month. Super excited for our annual Success Network conference. So this is taking place this year at Moraine Valley Community College in Palos Hills. The theme being Stronger Together, Creating Opportunity for Every Learner. So again, very resonant with the themes we discussed today around using that equity lens to reach students across demographic groups and income. But we'll hear from an incredible assortment of practitioners and policymakers in the state to give us their latest thinking, their latest practice around college and career, and arming students with those opportunities to discover what makes them tick and take off running and have opportunities to thrive in that area. So super excited. Emily dropped the link in the chat for registration, still open. Would love to see you all there. And I'll pass to Ben to just tell us about a specific data session you can expect to hear there.
Yeah, very excited. Thank you, everyone, for participation today. I always love this session and talking about all the different data that we have at the state level. But we're going to be doing a session late in the day during the conference on data. This will be building on our session from last year, which talked a lot about longitudinal data. But here we'll be in the process of releasing a playbook on data use. Key to us is making that process as inclusive as possible, and thinking about not only results over time longitudinally, but very much in line with what Bob has mentioned a few times, thinking about how do we compare different cohorts and how do you know if your programs are actually successful. For larger districts, can you compare groups of students that are maybe in a Pathways program to those groups of students that are not in Pathways programs? And if you're in a smaller district and you can't create those comparative sets, how can you work with other districts and groups to do so? So really excited to present on that. We'll hopefully be able to share some work that we've been doing in Rockford with state agencies and with our different Pathway programs, and look forward to seeing you there.
Thanks, Ben. Yes, very excited for that. I neglected to mention we'll also have over lunch an incredible presentation from student advisory council members from the Success Network. So really excited for you to hear from them and continue to center student voice and all of these emerging data and policy pieces to ensure we're building as strong and as equitable of systems as we can. So thank you again for your time and your thoughtful discussion. Learned a lot today, got a lot of great insight that helps me kind of continue to think about how we're dissecting this data. We did just drop a link in the chat for the exit slip. Please, if you could take just a minute as we have a few minutes left in the time, just to couple multiple choice questions and some optional open-ended questions around how are you thinking about using the data, and what additional data would you want to see. Really value your responses, and again, appreciate your time. Thank you to my co-presenters, the data team, Ben, Rusbe, Dominique, Emily, for your facilitation support, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Really great to connect with you all, and hope to see you at the conference next month.